The first thing I noticed wasn't the silence. It was the missing shadow. You know how you can come home after being gone for weeks, and somehow your eyes catch what's wrong before your brain does? That's exactly what happened to me. I pulled my old Ford into the driveway just before sunset, my grandson Luke riding shotgun, my younger grandson Ethan half asleep in the back seat after a long drive home from northern Michigan. We've been gone nearly 5 weeks visiting family, fishing, eating too much pie, doing all the things grandparents are supposed to do. The whole drive back, I kept thinking about my chickens. Not because they were special breeds or worth a fortune. Just because every evening around dusk they'd start making this ridiculous little chorus whenever they heard my truck coming down the gravel road. Sounded like 30 tiny old ladies gossiping all at once. I always smiled when I heard it. That evening, there was nothing. No clucking, no fluting, no scratching around the fence line. Just wind moving through the cottonwoods. At first I thought maybe they were inside the coop. Then I stepped out of the truck, and my stomach dropped. The coop was gone. Not damaged. Not partially knocked over. Gone. Where it should have been, there was only a patch of torn earth, scattered boards, twisted wire, fencing, and muddy feathers stuck to the ground. For a second, I genuinely thought I was looking at the wrong property. Luke climbed out beside me. "Grandma," his voice sounded small. "Where's the chicken house?" I didn't answer, because I couldn't. I was staring at a bright, yellow notice taped to my kitchen window. The paper flapped in the breeze like it was proud of itself. I walked over and pulled it down. Community Compliance Action Notice. I remember those words exactly. Funny how the brain works. You forget birthdays. You forget phone numbers. But you'll remember every word somebody uses when they decide to hurt you. According to the notice, a structure had been removed due to sanitation concerns and repeated neighborhood complaints. Removed. Such a clean little word. Makes destruction sound responsible. Makes trespassing sound official. Makes cruelty sound organized. I must have read that page 5 times before Luke finally asked, "Grandma, did somebody steal your chickens?" And honestly, that was the first moment I realized I had no idea where they were. Now here's something important you need to understand. That coop wasn't just a coop. My husband built it. His name was Walter. 6 months before cancer took him, he spent an entire autumn building that thing by hand. Not because we needed a fancy chicken coop, because he loved building things. Walter was the kind of man who believed if something was worth doing, it was worth overdoing. The nesting boxes were insulated. The roof was cedar. Every hinge was hand-installed. And underneath each nesting compartment, hidden where nobody would ever see it, he'd carved tiny initials. Mine and his. M+W. 42 years of marriage carved into wood. After Walter died, people kept telling me to stay busy. Anyone who's lost somebody knows how useless that advice is. Stay busy, as if grief is a schedule problem. But every morning I'd walk out to that coop, feed the hens, collect eggs, sweep the floor, check the water, and somehow that routine gave shape to days that otherwise felt empty. So standing there looking at the wreckage, it wasn't lumber I saw. It was memory, and somebody had bulldozed right through it. The next morning, I started making phone calls. Animal control told me several chickens had been spotted wandering near the woods behind my property. One had been found dead beside the county road. 3 more were never located. That news sat in my chest like a rock. Because animals trust us, those birds depended on me. And while I was hundreds of miles away, somebody had turned their world upside down. Around noon, I learned exactly who that somebody was. The Ridgeview Oaks Homeowners Association. Now, technically, my property wasn't part of Ridgeview Oaks. My farmhouse had been there since 1986, long before developers showed up, long before identical houses started multiplying across old farmland, long before people began treating rural land like decorative scenery. But my property sat right at the entrance of the subdivision, which meant for years I'd been dealing with complaints. The garden looked too rustic. The barn looked outdated. The chickens created the wrong impression. The wrong impression. Imagine buying a house in the countryside and then getting upset because you discovered countryside. And at the center of all those complaints was a woman named Pamela Hart, vice president of the HOA. Late 50s, always smiling, always polite, always holding a clipboard. The kind of person who could insult you while sounding like she was complimenting you. A year earlier, she'd stood near my fence watching the chickens scratch around the yard. Then she smiled and said, "You know, Nora, eventually this area is going to evolve." At the time, I laughed. Now, standing in my destroyed backyard, that conversation came back to me like a warning I should have understood. Because suddenly I realized something. This wasn't an accident. This wasn't a misunderstanding. Somebody had waited until I was gone, and they thought I wouldn't fight back. What they didn't know was that Walter left me more than a chicken coop. He left me every piece of paperwork he'd ever saved. And 2 days later, sitting inside the county records office, I was about to discover something that would change everything. I spent most of that Thursday afternoon sitting under fluorescent lights that made everybody look tired, flipping through property records that hadn't been touched in years. The clerk helping me was a young guy named Trevor. Nice kid, maybe 25. At one point, he looked over my shoulder and asked, "You searching for something specific?" "I'll know it when I find it," I told him. Truth was, I wasn't entirely sure what I was looking for. I just knew Walter never trusted handshakes when paperwork existed. That man documented everything. Old utility agreements, property surveys, tax records, permits, even receipts from fence repairs 20 years ago. If a squirrel sneezed near a property line, Walter probably had a file on it somewhere. 3 hours later, I found the document, and suddenly everything made sense. Years before Ridgeview Oaks existed, the original developer had needed temporary access across our driveway, while construction crews built an alternate service road. The agreement allowed limited use. Temporary use. That phrase jumped off the page. The secondary road was supposed to be completed within 18 months. It never was. Developers changed. Ownership changed. Management companies came and went. And eventually everybody started acting as if access through our driveway was permanent. Except legally it wasn't. The more I read, the more interesting things became. Emergency utility vehicles had access rights. Fire services had access rights. County maintenance crews had access rights. Garbage collection? Not listed. Not even mentioned. I remember leaning back in my chair and staring at the ceiling. A strange calm settled over me. Not anger. Not revenge. Something colder. More practical. Like finally seeing the entire chessboard. By the time I left the records office, I had copies of everything. By the next morning, I was at Dawson Industrial Supply ordering steel posts, commercial chain barriers, and a heavy-duty lock that looked strong enough to secure a prison yard. The salesman raised an eyebrow. "Protecting equipment." Something like that. He nodded. Didn't ask another question. Smart man. The installation took less than 2 hours. By sunset, a bright steel chain stretched across the entrance where service trucks normally entered Ridgeview Oaks. The red lock hanging from the center practically glowed in the evening sunlight. I'll admit something. For the first time since seeing the destroyed coop, I smiled. Not because I knew what would happen, because I knew I finally had a choice. Saturday morning arrived right on schedule. So did the garbage truck. I was sitting on my front porch with a cup of coffee when the big green truck came rolling down the road. The driver slowed, stopped, stared at the chain, then stared at me, then back at the chain. The poor guy looked like he'd already had a rough morning. He climbed halfway out the window. "Ma'am, I need access." I took a sip of coffee. "No, sir. You like access?" He blinked. I almost felt bad for him. Almost. After a long pause, he grabbed his radio. 10 minutes later, my phone rang. The woman from sanitation services sounded exhausted before she even introduced herself. "Mrs. Holloway?" "No, ma'am. That's the other lady causing problems." A small laugh escaped before she caught herself. "Mrs. Bennett, then. We understand there appears to be a dispute regarding access." "No dispute." Silence. Then keyboard clicking. "What exactly would you call it?" "A property owner exercising her rights." Another pause. Longer this time. Finally, she asked the question. "May I ask why access has been revoked?" I looked out toward the remains of Walter's coop. "Because one of your clients hired contractors who destroyed private property while I was out of state." Nothing. Then a quiet response. "Oh, not I see. Not understood. Just, oh." Funny how one word can carry an entire conversation. By Monday, things started getting interesting. Luke was staying with me for another week before heading home, and that boy spent half his time scrolling neighborhood social media pages. Every few hours, he'd walk into the kitchen trying not to laugh. You need to see this. Apparently, Ridgeview Oaks had descended into complete chaos. Residents blamed management. Management blamed contractors. Contractors blamed misunderstandings. Homeowners blamed each other. One man claimed the county should seize my property through eminent domain. Another suggested hiring a helicopter service for garbage removal. I wish I were kidding. Somebody else started a petition demanding emergency intervention because raccoons had discovered the overflowing dumpsters. The comments section looked like a digital fistfight. Meanwhile, Pamela Hart kept posting carefully worded updates. Community leaders are actively working toward resolution. Temporary access complications remain under review. Alternative service options are being evaluated. Not once did she mention the chicken coop. Not once did she mention the destroyed livestock. Not once did she mention the widow whose property they had entered without permission. That told me everything. By Wednesday, the smell started becoming a real problem. Summer heat in Missouri doesn't play around. Trash piled up. Bags split open. Flies multiplied. Residents started posting photos. Kids couldn't play near common areas. Dogs dragged garbage through yards. One homeowner reportedly canceled a backyard birthday party because guests complained about the odor. And every single day the garbage trucks arrived. And every single day they turned around. Thursday afternoon, Pamela finally showed up. She wasn't alone. 2 board members accompanied her. So did a lawyer. Now, if you've never met an HOA attorney before, imagine someone professionally trained to sound confident while delivering bad news. That's basically the job description. The 4 of them walked up my driveway like they were arriving for an intervention. I was sitting on the porch cleaning green beans. Didn't even stand up. Pamela spoke first. Nora, this situation has gone far enough. I dropped another bean into the bowl. That was fast. Usually HOA matters require 3 warning letters and a committee review. One of the board members accidentally laughed. Pamela shot him a look that could have frozen water. The lawyer stepped forward. Mrs. Bennett, your actions are disrupting essential sanitation services for an entire residential community. I nodded. Interesting. He waited. I waited. Eventually he asked, interesting how? Interesting that property rights only became important after my property was destroyed. The lawyer adjusted his glasses. Pamela crossed her arms. We're trying to be reasonable. I couldn't help smiling. Reasonable would have been knocking on my front door before demolishing something. The conversation went downhill from there. First, Pamela insisted complaints had been filed. I asked who filed them. She refused to answer. The lawyer threatened potential legal action. I handed him copies of the county records. He read the first page, then the second, then the third, and that's when I saw it. That tiny shift. The moment somebody realizes the facts aren't on their side. His confidence didn't disappear, but it definitely packed a suitcase. Finally, he lowered the paperwork. Where did you obtain these? County records. His jaw tightened. One of the board members looked suddenly interested in his shoes. Pamela looked furious. Not worried. Furious. Because for the first time she understood something she hadn't considered. I wasn't guessing. I wasn't bluffing. I knew exactly what rights I had. The lawyer cleared his throat. What would resolve this matter? There it was. The first real question anyone had asked since this nightmare began. Not what was legal. Not what was convenient. What would resolve it? I set the bowl aside and stood up. The porch suddenly felt very quiet. Even the birds seemed to stop making noise. Then I looked directly at Pamela. Before we discuss access, I said, you can explain what happened to my chickens. Nobody spoke. Not the lawyer. Not the board members. Not Pamela. For several long seconds, all I heard was the distant buzzing of cicadas. Finally, Pamela looked away. And in that moment, I knew something important. She wasn't avoiding the question because she didn't know the answer. She was avoiding it because she did. And whatever answer she had wasn't going to make her look good. What I didn't know yet was that over the next few days, the truth behind the demolition would begin leaking out from inside Ridgeview Oaks itself. And when it did, the entire story would become much uglier than anyone imagined. The truth started leaking out the way most small-town secrets do, not through official statements, not through lawyers, and definitely not through people in charge. It came from somebody's cousin talking to somebody's neighbor over coffee. Then another person confirmed it. Then another. Within a week, I had a pretty clear picture of what had actually happened. The complaints against my chickens hadn't come from dozens of residents. They hadn't even come from 10. Most of them came from the same handful of people connected to the HOA board. And the sanitation concerns? That part was even more ridiculous. A regional real estate investment group had recently toured Ridgeview Oaks. Several homeowners were preparing to sell. Property values had become an obsession. According to multiple residents, someone on the board decided my farmhouse, garden, barn, and chicken coop didn't fit the image they wanted buyers to see when entering the neighborhood. Imagine that. A farm looking too much like a farm. The more I learned, the less angry I became. Because anger eventually burns itself out. What replaces it is clarity. And clarity can be dangerous. Especially for people who mistake kindness for weakness. By the following Sunday, local news stations picked up the story. A reporter came out and interviewed me beside the remains of Walter's coop. The camera lingered on broken boards, on scattered feathers, on one of the nesting boxes where Walter's initials still remained carved underneath. The reporter asked if I felt responsible for the garbage situation affecting the subdivision. I thought about that question for a moment. Then I said, I think the people responsible are the ones who entered private property and destroyed something that didn't belong to them. That clip spread faster than I expected. Suddenly, everyone had an opinion. Some people called me stubborn. Others called me justified. A few called me a hero, which honestly felt a little dramatic. I wasn't trying to be a hero. I was just tired of being treated like I didn't matter. 3 days later, Pamela Hart came back. This time she came alone. No lawyer. No board members. No clipboard. That was probably the biggest surprise of all. She looked exhausted. The kind of tired that doesn't come from lack of sleep. The kind that comes from losing control. I was watering tomato plants when she walked onto the porch. For a few seconds, neither of us spoke. Then she quietly asked, "Can we talk?" I set the hose down. "Depends." She nodded slowly. "Fair enough." When she sat on the porch swing Walter built 20 years earlier, she looked older than I remembered. Smaller somehow. Like the confidence she usually carried had finally become too heavy. "The board has authorized a settlement offer," she said. "Full reconstruction of the coop. Compensation for lost livestock. Property damage reimbursement. Additional damages. Everything." I listened without interrupting. When she finished, she looked up. "What else do you want?" Funny thing about that question. Most people assume the answer is money. But money wasn't really the point. Not anymore. I leaned against the porch rail and looked toward the backyard. Toward the empty space where Walter's work used to stand. "You still don't understand what happened here." Her shoulders dropped. "Then explain it." So I did. I told her they saw an old widow and assumed nobody would push back. I told her they saw a farmhouse and mistook history for clutter. I told her they looked at something built by hand and assigned it a market value instead of a human value. For the first time since all this began, she didn't argue, didn't interrupt, didn't defend herself. She just listened, because deep down, she already knew I was right. Eventually, she asked the question that mattered. "What will reopen the access route?" I walked inside, retrieved a folder from the kitchen table, and handed it to her. She opened it, read the first page, then looked up at me. The expression on her face was priceless. "You're serious?" Completely. The document was simple. A private roadway access agreement. Monthly usage fee, $3,000. Paid on the first day of every month. Late payment terminated access. No exceptions. Pamela stared at me. "The homeowners will never approve this." I shrugged. "Then I guess you'll need a different road." For a long moment, she simply sat there. Then she laughed. Not because it was funny, because she finally understood the situation. The game was over, and she hadn't won. 2 days later, the agreement was signed. Every board member, every required signature. No negociations, no lawsuits, no appeals, just signatures. The first payment arrived by certified mail the following month. Luke wanted me to frame the check. Instead, I used the money to build something better. A new coop, stronger foundation, steel reinforcement, cedar siding, motion lights, predator-proof fencing. Everything Walter would have added if he'd built it today. And above the entrance, I hung the old wooden sign we'd managed to salvage from the debris. Bennett Family Farm, fresh eggs. Some of the residents still buy eggs from me. A few even apologized. One young couple brought flowers. Another family helped repair fencing. People are complicated. Not everybody follows the crowd forever. As for Pamela, she sold her house about 8 months later. Moved somewhere out west. At least that's what I heard. Maybe she found another neighborhood to organize. Maybe she didn't. Truthfully, I don't spend much time thinking about her anymore. But I do think about something else. Every time a payment arrives. Every time I walk past that new coop. Every time I hear chickens clucking near sunset. I think about how easy it is for communities to confuse rules with wisdom. How easy it is for people to mistake authority for righteousness. And how often nobody says a word when something wrong is happening, until consequences finally reach their own front door. Now here's the part people still argue about. Some folks say I should have reopened the road immediately. That innocent families suffered because of decisions they didn't make. Others say the HOA got exactly what it deserved. Honestly, I can understand both sides. Maybe I was stubborn. Maybe I went too far. Or maybe there comes a point where allowing people to ignore your boundaries teaches them the wrong lesson. I'll leave that decision to you. So tell me, if somebody destroyed something your spouse built with their own hands, something filled with memories and meaning, would you have unlocked the gate and moved on? Or would you have made sure they remembered your name every single month when the bill showed up? Let me know down in the comments. Because I have a feeling this is one of those stories where nobody agrees completely. And that's exactly what makes it interesting.